Issues I have with the Nostalgia Critic, you know, they're like buses, aren't they? You wait ages for one and then three come along at once. Just to be clear before I say anything else, I don't hate the Nostalgia Critic. I'm not starting to hate his reviews or anything. It just happens that I've made 3 videos in quick succession where I'm making counter-arguments to things that he said. It's just sort of the way that it's turned out. And also, before I go any further, this is regarding his review of Jack. I only saw the film Jack once, like several years ago. I thought it was alright, you know, nothing special, but I thought it was a reasonable enough film. I don't think I hate it quite as much as he seems to. But he does make a good point at the end of this review, which is this idea of a child trapped in an adult's body. It has been done better in other films, like Big and Freaky Friday. So this isn't really a film I would recommend, you know, because this idea has been done better in other films. I don't think it's a particularly bad film, but it's certainly nothing special. And overall, this was a good review. There were just a couple of things that he said in it that kind of bugged me. The first is this.
Cut to a mere 10 years later. Yeah, because I'm sure nothing interesting happened in that amount of time. No reporters, no news stories, no TMZ stalkers. Oh, for God's sake, how often are they gonna skip around gigantic periods of time that we'd actually be interested in seeing? Peabody and Sherman stayed in time periods longer than this!
I'm just finding this, like, really hard to comprehend. This guy, Doug Walker, has probably watched more films than 90% of the world's population. He's one of the most experienced amateur film critics on the internet, or, you know, just in general, really. And yet he doesn't seem to have grasped the basic concept of a prologue and an epilogue. That is what's going on here. The scene at the beginning is a prologue, and the scene at the end is an epilogue. The scene at the beginning, the prologue, is just showing Jack being born and establishing his physical condition, and explaining why, when he's 10 years old, he will physically be in the form of a 40-year-old man. But the actual story is about him as a 10-year-old. So obviously, they have to show him being born and establish his physical condition. Then they have to get to the actual story, which is him as a 10-year-old. So, logically, they skip over 10 years. Likewise, with the epilogue at the end, they wanted to show him graduating from high school. You graduate from high school at 17, or I guess you do, I don't live in the US. So obviously the story's about him as a 10-year-old. They want to show him graduating from high school as a 17-year-old. They skip over 7 years. It's just basic logic. So tons of films have skipped over periods of time after the prologue and before the epilogue. It's just a basic, simple tool of storytelling that you see in tons of films and tons of stories all over the map. I don't quite understand why he doesn't seem to understand that that's what's going on here. By the way, just another thing about him graduating from high school. He probably did die shortly after the events of this film. I guess they just didn't want to show it because they thought it would be too depressing or something. But yeah, it's just a basic tool of storytelling that he doesn't seem to have grasped here. I don't quite understand how he's failed to understand that's what's going on here. Okay, and the other thing he said in this review that kind of bugged me is this.
Okay, now here's the major problem with the movie. Jack is not being played like a 10-year-old. He's being played like a kindergartner. And there's a huge difference. Really think back to that age. Did most 10-year-old boys sleep with a doll, or wear silly pajamas, or sleep in an adult's bed because they had a bad dream? I mean, look at the other 10-year-olds in this movie. Would you imagine any of these kids sleeping in the bed with an adult? Most stories I hear about 10-year-olds usually sleeping in adults' beds end up in incarceration.
It's the rest of the world I'm worried about.
Another good example is when the parents decide that he should start public school. Look at this introduction.
How would you like to see your classroom? Yes?
Yes.
A little louder.
Yes.
A little louder, Jack.
Okay, maybe the kid with severe Tourette's syndrome would respond that way, but this is not the normal response for a 10-year-old. Could you imagine Harry Potter reacting this way at age 10?
Mr. Potter.
Yes!
Okay, to be fair, the Harry Potter gag at the end of that was pretty funny. But different kids will mature at different ages. You know, Jack is just not being portrayed as a kindergartner so much as just a kid who is taking a little longer to mature. A lot of kids at 10 years old probably didn't sleep with dolls and wear silly pyjamas. A lot of other kids probably did sleep with dolls and wear silly pyjamas at 10 years old. You know, different kids will mature at different ages. Jack is just taking a little longer to mature. That's all it is. He's not being portrayed as a kindergartner. He's just being portrayed as a kid who's taking a little longer to mature. I slept with a doll when I was 10 years old. I wore silly pyjamas when I was 10 years old. I never slept in my parents' bed. I actually never did that throughout my entire childhood. But yeah, different kids will grow out of things at different kind of ages. You know, there's no rule that says that you can't sleep with a doll when you're 10 years old, or wear silly pyjamas when you're 10 years old. You know, for one thing, those are things that are not being exposed to you in public. You know, maybe a lot of 10-year-olds who slept with dolls when they were 10 years old felt embarrassed about that, but no one's going to know unless they tell them. I probably am still a kid at heart, in certain ways. You are the Nostalgia Critic, for Christ's sake. You review kid shows and kids movies all the time. That element of your childhood has never really left you. You know. So how is it that you just cannot understand the concept of a child taking a little longer to grow out of certain elements of being a kid? He's an experienced movie critic, and yet he doesn't understand the concept of prologues and epilogues. And he's a guy who's obsessed with nostalgia, and yet he doesn't understand the concept of taking a little longer to grow up and grow out of certain childhood habits. It goes against, you know, what I would have associated with this guy and thought about this guy. But yeah, good review, and I still enjoy this guy's reviews in general. I just want to make that clear, but just those two things he said in the review kind of mystified me. Okay, that's all I've got to say about that, guys. See ya.